Okay, I didn't hear the little voice, but it says it's recorded.
Yeah, I see it too.
And let's take it from there and see what happens. And we are back on the 0 hour. I'm your host, Richard RJ Eskow. And joining me once again is our good friend and senior correspondent for the 0 hour, among many other qualifications, Sonali Kolhatkar. So, first of all, Sonali, it's been a couple of weeks. Welcome back.
Thank you so much, Richard. Glad to be here as always.
Well, glad to have you as always. But let's start with this. While in the past week or so, while you were away, and a little bit longer than that, the House and Senate have been busily working on a bill they call the Anti-Semitism Awareness Act. And I think you've been taking a look at it, thinking about that, haven't you?
I have. This was a very, very dangerous bill, and I'm glad I'm talking about it in the past tense. It was a very dangerous bill because thankfully it has died in the Senate. But the House passed this bill in early May. It was passed by a vast majority of House members, including Democrats, and it's called the Anti-Semitism Awareness Act and a bill, and it was a bill that would basically have criminalized speech when it came to the state of Israel. The idea was that the bill takes the working definition of anti Semitism as set out by the International Holocaust Remembrance Association, IHRA, I believe is the alliance, rather, International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance. It was a definition adopted by this organization many years ago, and the Anti-Semitism Awareness Bill set out to use that as a gold standard by which to claim that there is, basically anti-Semitic hate against Jews and Jewish people in the United States. It's particularly aimed at college campuses. And what's really interesting is that although the backers of the bill, which were mostly Republicans, kept referring to codifying the IHRA's definition, the person who actually created that definition, a man by the name of Kenneth Stern, has for several years now been saying that this definition was never intended to be a free speech code. It was never intended to be a code by which to measure hate, particularly on campuses, because it specifically impacts people's right to free speech. In fact, I saw a very interesting article that Kenneth Stern wrote more than 5 years ago in The Guardian, because Republicans and conservatives for many years have been attempting to use this definition at the state level and at the federal level. And what Kenneth Stern said was that he, in his definition, had used many examples, some of which were that if people held actions by the state of Israel as something that all Jews were responsible for, then that would constitute anti-Semitism, etc. And he makes it very clear that anti-Zionism is not anti-Semitism. And so, this is a bill that the House passed. And then the Senate Education Committee, the Labor, Education, and Pensions Committee, when it came time for them to discuss it, that bill died after basically Senator Bernie Sanders took the lead against it, along with Senator Rand Paul, and with a coalition of all the Democrats on that committee, along with Susan Collins and Rand Paul, they managed to defeat that very, very dangerous bill.
Well, it's interesting because, as of all places, the Forward, formerly the Jewish Daily Forward, which my grandfather used to read regularly in Yiddish, as they report, the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism has 11 sort of qualifications for what constitutes anti-Semitism. More than half, 6 of them, involve the state of Israel. Some of them should be uncontroversial, calling for aiding or justifying the killing of harming of Jews in the name of a radical ideology or extremist view of religion and so on, or lying about Jews, dehumanizing, demonizing, stereotyping them, accusing Jews as a people of being responsible for real or imagined wrongdoing committed by a single Jewish person or group, even for acts committed by non-Jews. Those are the first three. One of the interesting developments in this was that House conservatives tacked an amendment onto their version of the bill that actually flies in the face of these, or flew in the face, hopefully we can use the past tense, of these classic definitions of anti-Semitism. They claimed that it would be an infringement on the religious rights or freedoms of their kinds of Christians, I assume is what they mean, to accuse Jews of what is known as blood libel, namely that all Jews are guilty for the killing of Jesus. Now, when I was growing up many years ago, that was the one form of anti-Semitism we all, virtually all of us, experienced it in one time or another, being called Christ killer, Jews killed Jesus, your people killed Jesus, and so on. That was street level, daily anti-Semitism, which the House version, at least, would have legalized, leaving essentially only the criticism of Israel as a state. That to me was astonishing, and it amazed me it didn't get more public attention or debate.
Yeah, and I'm so glad you brought that up, because that was something that Senator Rand Paul did bring up in the Senate committee discussion. But it really illustrates that carve out, that exception that House Republicans in particular made in the House version of the bill to say that, well, we should still have the right to say the Jews killed Jesus, which basically is the classic definition of racism of any kind, but specifically even anti-Semitism, which is that if you can say that some Jewish people did this, then you can basically blame the entire community for having done a certain act. But it really illustrates so classically the exceptionalism, the hypocrisy that a deeply anti-Semitic party, because I think we can safely say that the Republican Party is an anti-Semitic party, since they tend to uncritically back a president who is friends with anti-Semites, that this party has any moral standing to claim that they are fighting anti-Semitism. This is a party that, as Bernie Sanders pointed out in his Senate committee speech, didn't speak up when the Charlottesville Nazis chanted "Jews will not replace us," or when Trump said there were fine people on both sides. They didn't speak up against that. They are backing a president who hobnobs openly with anti-Semites, and whose right-hand man made the Nazi salute on Inauguration Day. So it's really quite remarkable to see how this party and its members continue to basically, I think we should very clearly say, use Jews and Jewish Americans as pawns in their attempt to foist attacks on free speech, in their attempt to silence and police free speech, particularly on US campuses, which they have long seen as centers, as bastions of left-wing activism and of criticism of the right and of holding the right accountable. This is a bludgeon to impact the free speech of students. And if they can do that successfully, then they've actively quelled the younger generation's activism, going forward. And I think we really need to keep showcasing that and pointing that out.
Absolutely. And not just students, but recipients of government grants for research or what have you. And I'm really glad you pointed out that it's an exploitation of anti-Semitism. And, in my opinion, I've written about this, an exploitation specifically of Jewish trauma. And that to me is despicable. And it's interesting, very interesting to me also that you mentioned Kenneth Stern, who I guess was the primary author of this definition, because his definition is problematic to me. So I'm glad that, there are limits to it. But for example, he says, it's anti-Semitic to accuse Jewish citizens of being more loyal to Israel or the alleged priorities of Jews worldwide. Yes, he uses the plural. In that case, definitely anti-Semitic. There are individual, my own godfather felt more strongly allied to Israel than the United States, eventually moved there. Okay, I mean, that's his right. That's freedom of speech.
Yeah.
But the definitions regarding Israel, I don't think they're done by any means trying to silence speech. We have now I hope this bill doesn't come back. It seems to have, more lives than a cat. But one of the encouraging signs for me is that some of the Democrats who voted for it the last time around in the U.S. Senate and in the House did not vote for it this time. I didn't study that as closely. I know my own representative, Jamie Raskin, voted for it last time, did not vote for it this time. I'm hoping as part of a broader trend and a hopeful sign. Also, there were more Democrats, it seemed, speaking out against it in the Senate. Is that your perception?
I think so. And, Representative Jerry Nadler also took a very leading position against the bill. And I think to me, this is such an also important illustration of the power of narrative when we have leaders like Sanders or Nadler and others speaking out very forcefully and changing, holding people accountable that has an impact. It's not just all about alignment or about politicking. The more that we speak out about these issues, the more impact it has, because Sanders essentially shamed his colleagues. He challenged them, and so did Nadler in the House. Not that he had as much impact, because a majority of Democrats still seem to have voted for it. Something like only 70. There were only a total of 70 votes against the bill. Approximately majority of the House voted for it, but in the Senate committee in particular, it had an impact for Sanders to take a clear, principled position on it. And he could have chosen not to. He could have chosen to make a short statement, registered his displeasure, and voted no. But he showed some leadership. He used a bully pulpit, and he whipped his colleagues into shape. That's how you do politics. That's how you have cultural change. And a lot of the reason why it's taken so long to make clear that anti-Zionism is not anti-Semitism, and of course we're a long way from doing that, but maybe we're getting a little further, is because Biden and during his administration tended to go that route. Senator Chuck Schumer, et cetera, of course, jumping on that bandwagon. They laid the groundwork for conflating anti-Zionism with anti-Semitism and making it easy for Trump to use accusations of anti-Semitism as a bludgeon against free speech. And they should be held accountable. They should be called out as well, so that any future administration that's Democratic, knows better. So yeah, I think this is also, it's important to point out that this is illustrative of the power of narrative.
Absolutely. I'm glad you mentioned anti-Zionism too, because we're definitely not there in terms of, and I'm not saying there in terms of whether one is or is not anti-Zionist in their position. We're not there in terms of the discourse yet, as you pointed out or implied. Even, Bernie, I think recently, I have great affection for my old boss, but recently I think he said Israel has a right to exist. Peter Beinart was on this program recently. His new book is great. If you haven't interviewed him, you should. And he makes the great point that, and speaking as an Orthodox Jew, that nations don't have a right to exist. People have a right to exist, which I embrace. Israelis have a right to exist. I will fight to the death over that. But Bernie's amendment on the topic of not allowing anti-Semitism to stifle speech. At least one of them that I was able to find was very specifically targeted towards criticism of Netanyahu and
Yeah.
in the invasion of
He's
Gaza.
careful. Sanders is careful.
Yeah,
And,
yeah,
he plays a game to try to ensure that he doesn't over alienate his Democratic colleagues. He walks a certain line, and I get it. I think it's his job to do what he wants to do, and it's the job of the rest of us to keep pushing him and keep pushing his colleagues further and further in the right direction to be. I don't even want to say further to the left, but to be pro human rights, because you're right that if we're very clear on what we mean by the rights of people, then we can very, very simply take clear, strong stands to both protect free speech and the rights of people. If conservatives, if Democrats, if Republicans were really interested in protecting Jewish Americans, they would be not stripping away DEI initiatives, not stripping away the power of the Office of Civil Rights, all of those laws, policies, government agencies that have been put in place to protect the rights of minorities that Trump is busy dismantling. Right. Those protect Jewish Americans in the same way they protect other minorities of communities of color, sexual minorities, the disabled community, etc. This is really, really important. And that is where that language of human rights and protecting the rights and dignity of people can come in. But if we keep singling out communities, this community over that, then we're leaving out other communities. Because, of course, the flip side of criticizing the state of Israel is rampant Islamophobia, right? You don't see any interest in holding Islamophobes accountable, which, of course, this administration is both anti-Semitic and Islamophobic.
And maybe, this will be my closing comment. I'll give you the last word, but we've also seen in terms of the protests against what Israel's doing that, well, I've visited or spoken to people on multiple campuses, 30-40% of the people involved in student activism against what Israel's doing are Jewish. In my experience, it's normally a coalition of the Muslim Students Organization and Jewish Voice for Peace. That's the normal alliance I've seen. And I think of Rabbi Alyssa Wise, for example, who said that she is against the occupation because of her Judaism.
Yes.
So you actually have the case where not only, as you say, are they dismantling the institutions that protect Jews, but in many cases, they're persecuting Jews for practicing their Judaism in a way that the state disapproves of.
Agreed. And I think that is such an important point. In my coverage of the campus encampments over the past year or so, I have spoken to many Jewish students as well, principled young people who are standing arm in arm with Palestinian Americans and Muslim students and people who are, atheists and who are of other faiths, who are really, really clarifying their position, have such moral clarity when it comes to Israel's genocide in Gaza. They have held religious ceremonies, claiming, as you've said, that because of their faith, that their faith calls on them to speak out against Israeli apartheid of Palestinians and the Israeli genocide in Gaza. And I think that is so important. And I believe Sanders did call that out and point out that this very dangerous bill would have criminalized these young people as well. And I also want to point out that, Richard, one of the things that I think about a lot and write about a lot is policing, and how policing is basically a weapon of power, of state power, of conservatism, of money, of capital. And in this particular case, we're seeing the weaponization of anti-Semitism and the policing of speech as translating into literal policing, deploying police to campuses to arrest students, deploying enforcement agents from ICE to harass and round up, detain, and deport students on F1 visas who might in any way have shown sympathy for Palestinians. And I think that's so important for us to keep pointing out, because that is the tool that conservatives in particular love to resort to. They talk about free speech, but when they want to apply their standards, they'll be the first to trot out the cops and to enact force, rather than actually support and protect free speech. And so I think we need to absolutely point out that that if we want that part of the movement for abolition includes creating spaces where we can all speak freely without an armed agent of the state standing by with a baton and handcuffs, right? So that's really important as well.
Right. Or hitting us with the baton and throwing us down the stairs and putting the handcuffs on us, which they also have done in Colombia and elsewhere, right?
Yes,
So,
absolutely. Yes. And I also just want to point out that Jewish Voice for Peace is currently holding, I believe, in Baltimore over the weekend and through this week. I believe there's a series of events that they're holding, a really important big conference. And folks like Robin D.G. Kelly and Rashida Tlaib and other leaders in the pro-Palestinian movement are speaking out. And I greatly admire JVP as being, it really emerged as one of the leading organizations, I think, as they should be, in speaking out, because they see how clearly they are being used and their faith is being misused to justify a genocide. And I love seeing this strong leadership and activism from this organization.
we depend on your support here at the Zero Hour, so please give whatever you can at any of the links you see on your screen. Thanks so much.